Moj današnji gost u Pojačalu je Peter Nelly i ovo će biti druga epizoda koju snimamo na engleskom jeziku jer je Peter Italijan-Kanadžanin. Njegova karijera je potpuno neverovatna i tokom nje je radio neke zaista sjajne stvari u oblasti klasične animacije, digitalne animacije i specijalnih efekata. Zašto je Peter moj gost? Pa zato što je on deo jedne neverovatne priče koja se dešava u Beogradu, a iza koje stoji Jervolino Lady Bacardi Entertainment, odnosno jedan neverovatan animacioni studio u Beogradu koji pravi jedan sjajan serijal crtanih filmova zajedno sa Johnny Deppom. U pitanju je Puffins Impossible, ali to je samo jedan mali deo onoga što je on u karijeri radio, a cela karijera je stvarno nesvakidašnja i neverovatna, a počinje od toga što je on jedno dete u jednoj italijanskoj porodici u Kanadi, čiji otac neverovatno podsjeća i fizički po ponašanju na Freda Kremenka. I sad kako odatle do Hollywooda i svega onoga što je radio, pa vidjet ćete u ovoj epizodi, siguran sam da će vam biti zabavno. Realizaciju ove epizode Pojačala podržala je kompanija Epson. Epson je već više od 20 godina vodeći svetski proizvođač projektora i štampača za sve namene, od onih kućnih do profesionalnih. Posebno vam skrećemo pažnju na aktuelnu ponudu Epson Business štampača. Naime, ukoliko je došlo vreme da kupujete štampače za vaše poslovne potrebe ili da zanovite trenutnu flotu štampača koju imate, obavezno istražite koja to sve rešenja Epson nudi, jer pored zaista sjajnih štampača koji vam nude besprekoran kvalitet otiska, mnogo manju potrošnju električne energije, mnogo manje otpada generisanog u procesu, uz Epson rešenja uvek dobijete i celu paletu softvera koja se kod drugih proizvođača doplaćuje, a ovde dolazi besplatno za sve njihove korisnike. Za više informacija pogledajte businessprint.com, piše se onako kako se izgovara. Hvala vam. Za slučaj da želite da nas podržite vi individualno, možete da posetite link u opisu podcasta na platformi Buy Me a Coffee i tu možete kupiti mesečnu pretplatu ili jednokratno donirati neki iznos koji želite. Hvala vam unapred na tom. So Peter, thank you for coming. It's lovely having you here. Every time, this is just the second time I have someone and we are speaking English. The first time was my friend Dave Beers, who is a famous Scotsman. So it's kind of different than speaking with someone who speaks proper English. Yeah. But your story is so amazing, and your story is now, for the last couple of years, really deeply connected to Serbia and developing our, let's say, computer animation industry. And I wanted to share that story and explain to people, how does one amazing professional become what you are now? It's a 30, 40-year long process. For everyone, it's like that, but in your case, it involved different surroundings, different cultures. You've been working in different countries. It's been a really fun roller coaster ride. And recently we had the chance to hear a little bit of that on our digital conference in Niš. Yeah. But I wanted to have the bigger story and all the details. And after a couple of months of organizing things, you're finally here. So for the beginning, for the first question, the one I always ask every my guest, the Munchmellow questions. When you were a kid, what did you want to do when you grow up?
Yeah. Thanks for having me here, Ivan. I've been looking forward to it. And so this is an interesting question for me, because when I was really, really young, I don't remember this, but my folks told me that I wanted to be a priest. So I wanted to work in the church. I don't anymore. But I think it was just because I come from a large Italian family, and we would go to church, and I guess he was the center stage. He was the Elvis of that building, and so maybe it looked really interesting to me. When I got a little bit older, I actually wanted to be a physicist. So I was really into science. You don't know this. I don't think we've ever talked about it, but I wanted to go into physics. In fact, in school, there was like a special program that if you were particularly gifted in something, they would take you out of one of the general classes, and you would go with other sort of gifted kids, and it would be it was usually around science, physics, astronomy, that kind of thing. I haven't thought about this in a long time, actually, since you asked me that. And so I remember really, now I don't know how smart all the other kids were. I think it wasn't, we were all kind of turkeys. I was just a little bit better of a turkey. And so, but I was really interested in physics at the time. And I think, well, I know that the mechanics of the universe were really interesting to me, like how things work and the beauty of how they all fit in and make sense, that I was really interested in, especially within physics. Richard Feynman, do you know who he is?
Of course.
He's probably, people ask this question, if you could speak to anyone alive or dead for 1 hour, who would it be? And for me, it would be Richard Feynman. For your listeners, I'm sure most of them know who it is, but maybe some of them don't. He was one of the youngest physicists. I think he was 19 to work on the Manhattan Project. Yeah. And he was also the host of Nova before Carl Sagan and Tyson, the new host. And I think he's from New York or New Jersey. And he's a proper genius, or was a proper genius. He was probably one of the smartest, I think he was a theoretical physicist at the time, and he was brilliant. But what I really loved about him is that he was able to really take really complex ideas and make them so pedestrian and so approachable. And I think that's the hallmark of true genius, right? You have geniuses who are elitist, right? They're so entrenched in their science that you need a PhD to understand them and even follow along. And I think it's cool, but I think there's a kind of exclusivity or elitism to it. And Feynman was so approachable, you know what I mean? Like he was so, at least the way he spoke was so accessible and fun and exciting and crass. And, he kind of had that kind of accent where he almost sounded like he was, like he was the everyman, but he was talking about quantum mechanics, and he made it so digestible and interesting that it was amazing. And so I would say, if I know you didn't ask me this question, but if it was one person I would speak to alive or dead, it would be Richard Feynman. And so I wanted to be a physicist, but I could always draw. In fact, I was saying that I come from a large Italian family. When I was younger, Sunday or Saturday was chore day. So that's the day that we do all the housework within the house. And my dad, who I love to death. My dad is very funny unintentionally. He looks like Fred Flintstone. You remember Fred Flintstone from the cartoon? And so, in fact, as a kid, for a while, up until I started school a little bit later, I thought everyone's dad looked like a cartoon character. Like, my dad looks like Fred. Yours must look like George Jetson. Yours must look like Captain Caveman or something, right? So my dad looks like Fred Flintstone and very much embodies that persona. And he hates... he still does, hates doing the chores, like the domestic stuff. He's a great cook. He's excellent at cooking, but he doesn't like doing the cleaning part of it, right? And so anything that requires this kind of cleaning, et cetera. And so we would fix things in the house that weren't broken, right? So Saturday we would get the tools and the washing machine perfectly good. We would muck about with it and break it. We would, the VCR is not working, or the VCR was working totally fine. We would get to it and we would break it. And so that was part of our Saturday. We would, he would get me, because every good craftsman needs an assistant or punching bag, and he would come and get me. Get up 7 a.m. We're fixing something, and I would go with him, and we would start working on it. And he has this. He wouldn't bring all the tools that he would need, because he doesn't have a clue what he's going to fix, right? He's really good at visualizing the problem, but he's not really good at fixing the problem. And really, it's about fixing the problem, right? That's the real mustard. And so he would come there, and he would have a hammer, because everything requires a hammer, right? And so he would start fixing. He'd look at it, and he went, huh. He goes, oh, I need that. His English is good, but whatever that specific tool is, he wouldn't know how to say it in English. He would say it in Italian. And even then, he would kind of say the tool and then kind of what it does. Like, he would just give me hand gestures like this. And is this a lathe? Is this I don't know exactly. So I wasn't in love fixing this stuff because it always ended the same, right? It was always ending in a fight. So I would go find the tool, at least what I thought he was looking for, right? And I would come back with it, and he would be very upset because it was not the right tool. And he thought that I was trying to sabotage the breaking / fixing of whatever we're doing, and that I don't want to do it, which I really didn't. And we would end in a fight. I remember one time, he has a electrical engineering degree. So I guess it makes him an expert in electricity. So we were fixing the light switch downstairs, and he was on a short ladder. And he told me to go turn off the particular switch that it was. I don't know if I hit the wrong one or if I was upset with him at the time. It was a long, long time ago. And so he says, "Did you do it?" And I said, "Yeah, I got it." And so he goes to muck about with the thing, and he gets shocked, right? Like he gets shocked. I saw some sort of like TV special that if you're supposed to do that, you're supposed to knock the person away because they can't break contact with it, right? And so I knocked him off the ladder. So Fred Flintstone's falling to the ground, and he's like, "Why the hell did you do that?" I go, "I thought that's what you were supposed to do." Secretly, I loved it too, because it gave me a reason to sort of cumulatively, manifest all the things that I was frustrated about. So that light doesn't work in the house anymore. Now, if we weren't fixing things that weren't broken on Saturday, my dad would go. My dad comes from banking, so he's retired now, much to the chagrin of my mom, but he's retired now. And so we would go to either Frank or Joe's place of work on Saturday, because they would work at their office sometimes, and do their taxes. This is me air quoting, by the way. So I'm air quoting. We would do their taxes. He would help them with their accounting, which was really just a veiled excuse for us, or my dad, to go and drink, smoke, and play cards, right? So they would be at their office on a Saturday, probably telling their wife and kids the same thing. And then my dad would come and play cards. And my mom, she'd be like, "All right, take the boy." That's me. I'm the boy, right? And so I was like, ugh. So we're driving in the car, and we end up in the office, and he would go there and play cards. And he doesn't really think like a kid. Like, he doesn't have this, "Oh, this kid's going to be bored." He's like, "All right, he's going to come and he'll figure stuff out." Right. So I was super bored. And the only thing there were mechanical pencils to do the taxes and this graph paper for figuring out the numbers. And so I would draw. And I spent a lot of time because, he did a lot of taxes, a lot of Saturdays just drawing, like lots and lots, and making up worlds and coming up with characters, and I was already a pretty good drawer, pretty good illustrator. I mean, it's a drawer when you're a kid, and so I wanted to pursue doing comics. That was like, okay, I want to do this forever. I like science. I think that's a cool job, but I want to do this forever, whether if you pay me or not pay me. And so I would do them. I would do these drawings, and like I said, we had a large Italian family. I have 3 other siblings, and we were doing okay, but I would want to buy different toys from the store as well, like the He-Man or the G.I. Joe, which He-Man was really popular. And they're like, "No, you can't do that. We got to fix stuff." And so we're buying new VCR because we broke it, right? And so I would draw these like G.I. Joe type or He-Man characters on paper, and then I would cut them out. And I would figure out how to make them into kind of like my own version of. They were always cooler, like, because it was more specific to me, and so that was really how I started out, like falling in love with drawing, with this kind of art or commercial art or illustration or comic books.
Every time I talk to people, and there've been roughly 200 people sitting where you sit now.
It's still warm, this seat.
Every time. If they're successful now, and if they're successful and happy what they're doing, every time a very big deal is that it has something to do with what they want to do when they grow up. I mean, you can't be good at what you are doing now if you don't have talent for drawing, illustration, visual art, but you also cannot be good if you don't understand the physics. Yeah. Because the idea of creating an artificial fake world that is believable, it has to work. It has to make sense.
100%.
It can have quirks and their own special rules. But the basic rules have to somehow follow what we are accustomed to, because otherwise, people are not gonna see it like something that's believable. And it has to be believable. The one thing I adore about now cartoons, when I grew up, cartoons were hand-drawn things. But now with 3D and everything, the one thing that makes the biggest difference for me are gestures and face gestures as well.
Yeah.
You can have minions and they can show million emotions with just the glow in their eyes.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be complicated. It has to be, so to say, accurate. And from there on, you can do amazing things. Growing up, we had Mickey Mouse, we had Flintstones, we had a ton of these things. They were hand-drawn characters and they had their own story and it was amazing. But there were no details. It had to be over-the-top reaction for you to figure out what's going on. Yeah. Now, it can be more subtle than with the actors.
Well, it's nuanced now.
Basically.
Yeah, I think drawing and animation, and in this case physics and science, are both question asking. So you're always asking questions, why this, why that? And I think both those chain of thoughts help me. So in physics, when I was still interested in it. I mean, I don't have the acumen or the schooling now to be like valuable, but the question asking and understanding how much of it is interconnected is so important in both fields. And so I think you hit the nail on the head that even the world building, but just this question asking, does this make sense at the end of it? Do I believe this? Does this flow?
It's not even just, asking questions, does this make sense? It means you see something that's 99.9% done. They play it too. It's a scene, something.
Sure.
And you don't know why, or maybe you know why, but something's off. And it's off by 0.5%.
Yeah.
But it's off because you feel it. For some reason, you feel that there is a glitch in the matrix.
Yeah.
And that's something that comes from knowledge and experience.
100%.
You can't, there is no process that can replace experience in terms of this.
No. With the exception of savants, people who have some sort of, I make this analogy for a lot. I've had students before, but so the amateur and the master actually have very similar process, but their route to getting to it. For example, in drawing, so you have masters who eventually just draw the outside of the person, the contour, and it's beautiful. They don't draw any extra lines. The amateur approaches it the same way. The amateur will draw the outside of the person because that's all they see. The difference is the amateur starts drawing the outside because that's all they see. The master draws the outside, then realizes that's wrong, then learns all the what you call the gesture, line of action, the construction, the building blocks, and then learns all that building blocks to build it up. And then eventually something happens. If they become a master, they already know all that stuff. And then when they draw it, it's already integrated or incorporated into seeing it, and they're just drawing that final result. So it's this kind of interesting intuition that comes at the end of a process that you have to learn to trust. So before I would be analytical about it. So okay, what's not working? Is it the timing? And I'll get to that point if I have to explain it to someone else. But a lot of times I'll watch something and I'll say, how do I feel about this? Do I like it or I don't like it? Do I think it fits or doesn't fit? And my first reaction, usually I act upon it. I say, okay, just like you said, something's off. And I don't let it slide. I don't say, I don't know exactly what it is yet because I have to be analytical, but my intuition, which is taking all these really heavy things and all these very subtle things, weighing it out and says, this isn't right yet. And I trust it now. This is probably one of the trickiest thing when growing older is to trust my intuition and not second guess why I don't like it yet. I don't like it. And then when I have to explain, I say, okay, let me analyze this and break it down. It says, okay, what's working, what's not working? But you hit the nail on the head in that intuition comes from learning, study, practice until it becomes intuitive.
Yeah. And it comes from a lot of second guessing before you say, okay, I don't have to do this anymore. Sometimes I will still do it, but I don't have to do this anymore because now I wouldn't say I'm a master, but I have a track record.
Yeah.
And I have the capacity to just say whether this is okay or not. But the moment, the thing, not many people understand. I had similar situations, but not with the animation, of course, with different visual arts, is stop, something is wrong then. No, watch till the end. I can't watch till the end if something is off here.
You got it. You hit it. You felt it. So it's hard to trust your intuition when a lot of other people are either supporting an idea or championing something that you feel is wrong. So you really have to have fortitude of character and of your own opinion to say, no, I know everyone else is saying that this is correct, or everyone else is saying, I like it. You really have to have confidence in your own ability to say, I don't. And I don't think I can resolve this, no matter how much of this you're going to show me afterwards.
Look, cartoons are amazing. And in cartoons, especially ones that are not just for the kids, like we grew up watching Simpsons and Family Guy and stuff like that. That's not just for the kids. It's interesting for the kids as well, but I'm 37 and I still find it funny.
Well, even The Muppet Show, which
which is ridiculously good.
Yeah, but it's not even it was prime time, so it wasn't for kids market, but if you look at it, it's essentially puppets.
The best explanation why we shouldn't ask too many people when it comes to design is from Simpsons, when Homer designs a car designed by committee.
Yeah.
And you see how the process looks, what's the end result.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I even used it as an explanation when I was, teaching these things. I can explain, it will take me 30 minutes, or I can play you this video for a minute and a half and everything will be clear to you. Yeah. What do you want? Play the video. I play the video. We never speak about that topic
Does
again.
It work?
Of course.
Okay, good.
Because it's visual.
Yeah.
It's simplified, it's visual, and of course, if it's in The Simpsons, it has an amazing storytelling.
Sure.
Anyway, when it was time to pick out your career, how did it unfold?
So, I continued to draw throughout primary school, and I was really good. I was probably one, if not the best, within the school, or at least my class, the upper echelon. And then I went through high school, and I probably could have been a better student in high school. I think I wasn't so much focused on the academics because I had convinced myself I'm going to get into drawing. And I actually didn't want to get into animation. I wanted to draw comic books. So I was doing a lot of that. And I applied to, there were two schools. There was a graphic design school, and then there was an animation school. And in Canada, we have one of the best animation schools worldwide. So that was Sheridan, still is. So there was CalArts, Sheridan. There weren't so many. It was an animation program in 1967. But I was not interested in animation at the time. I mean, I loved animation and cartoons, but I didn't think about that as a career choice. I wanted to draw comics because I don't even think I realized about how animation was connected to what I wanted to do, which I'll come to in a second. So I wanted to draw comics, and I was too late to apply for Sheridan at the time. So I went to another school in the city, and I was doing a graphic design with a major in advertising. But I hated it. I didn't hate it. I just felt like it had really little to do with drawing. I mean, it was not pushing my comic book dreams any further. And it was only going to get me a degree. I was good at computers, so there was a computer element. It was just at the beginning of Quark Express and Illustrator. So they were migrating from traditional graphic design, which is Letraset and marker renderings and such, and into the computer realm. So that was good. And it also gave me a really good, strong sense of design, like actual design, which plays a role later on. And so I was studying graphic design. I was gonna major in advertising, which I did. But the first year, I dropped out. I didn't finish it. we had life drawing. You know, this is drawing from the nude figure. And I had only showed up for 2 classes. And within those 2 classes, I had a 75%. Meaning I had dropped out and I still retained a 75% in the class, which I'm pretty good at life drawing, but it means how low the bar was that everyone else is, that I was above average and I only showed up for 2 of the classes. He had marked it for the work that I had done. And so I had dropped out and I went to Italy for a bit, for a couple of months and just lived for a bit. Like I learned about what life is. And I came back and I went back into the program and I finished it. And at the end of my year, I applied to go to Sheridan, the animation program. And the first part had a portfolio submission event. So what you had to do is you had to submit, I remember if there was some life drawing, which was fine because I had those 2 days, right? Or whatever it is. It also had a what's called a 3/4 down shot of a room. So it's what it is you have a room and you have almost a bird's eye view of the room, and you have to draw it from one corner and all the objects within it, and then the opposite corner. So and so that you can spatially, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you understood perspective. It wasn't completely orthographic, but it was more orthographic than traditional drawings of in a room. And then you had to do, they had a character that you had to do 5 different expressions of, and you also had an object that you had to do in like it's not a wireframe, but a contour one and then a construction one. And I chose a doorknob. So I took the doorknob and I took it apart for a few reasons. One, I think my dad broke it, right? It's one of the, so he hadn't fixed it, right? So I was like, I'll fix this. This will be my legacy. But it also had a lot of these rounded parts, so you couldn't cheat it. And the way, if you've actually taken a doorknob apart across 2 different sides, the way the mechanism fits into place is very complex for a very simple object, but also very interesting how the different parts fit. And
it looks good.
Yeah, it was a really good one. So that was the first. I passed this portfolio submission that you were supposed to go. The next stage was a in-school exam, which is a 3-hour intensive exam. So I think something like 1,400 people apply in the first part, and about 100 people get in on the next part. I mean, the coordinator at the time, Brian LeMay, he's worked on a bunch of stuff. He says, look at the person to the right of you and look at the person to the left of you. One of those people are not going to be here after the exam, which is great motivational speak before an exam, by the way. Well done, Brian. And so this exam was a life drawing session. So you would draw from life, a model in front of you. The second part was they give you the 3/4 down shots of a room, and then they tell you you're sitting in this chair, draw what you see. So you have to extrapolate the perspective and reverse it. And then the final one, they give you a character. I think it was Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck, a model sheet, which is, for those of the people listening, it's how the character looks in the different, so from the front, from the side, from the 3/4. And what you do is they have a model. In this case, there was another live model. We went back to the life drawing room, and you would have to draw that model or you have to draw that character with that model's pose.
Of course.
And it was intense. And after it, I got into the program. I had a couple of friends who were, one friend and then a couple others once I got into the program who were a year ahead of me within the program. And so, but my only intention was to go, the reason why I went to Sheridan, because I wanted to draw comics better. And the program, the classical animation program, were the best artists of definitely within the country, but even internationally were coming in. So I extrapolated, I said, okay, I want to draw the best comics ever. The best school for drawing is not the illustration program, but the animation program. Do I really like animation? Yeah, I like it. Do I want to do it? No, I want to draw comics better. But all the best artists were going here. So I figured it was by being surrounded by other people who were at the best at what they did, regardless if it's animation or illustration comics, I would end up being better because that's where the highest talent was, right? But a funny thing happened when I was there in the program. I started to realize that animation has, I still love comics, but animation deals with 4 dimensions. So, which is how something changes over time and space, right? And when I was thinking about it, I go, this is so much more complex and nuanced and performance-based than comic books was. Comic books there's graphic design, definitely, but you're really capturing moment to moment to moment. It's sequential in story art, but animation does that on like an Olympic level. Like you have to be able to draw everything great, but that's not even the skill of animation. Animation is that ability to understand performance and imbue that in the drawings that you're doing with time and space. And it
has to be perfectly fluid.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not believable.
The believability was the most important part. In a comic book, you can get by with style, and you have to be a strong draftsman, but you don't necessarily need to understand true performance. Like what's the difference between someone who's walking and someone who's meandering, or someone who's pacing quickly and someone who's running? Like this difference in animation is big. In comics, you just sort of have these kind of snapshots. And so the more I started to understand it, and I started to really understand that maybe I was more in love with animation than I thought I was. And so I said, you know what? I think this is my calling, which is animation. And I really started to heavily invest in that kind of academia. So I was still living quite far. I didn't live on campus. It was expensive, and I wasn't making enough at my job to move and live there. So I was commuting approximately 2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes one way, and then 2.5 hours one way back to school. So it was bus, subway, train, bus to the school. And during that time, I was spending a lot of time drawing and reading about stuff that I loved. I usually had 3 books with me. One was a sketchbook at all times. One was not a technical book, but something about whatever I'm learning about. And then one was not a trash or pulp book, but something that I enjoy reading for fun. So some fantasy books or some Mickey Spillane, so crime novels or whatever it was. It was always some fun. It was always 3 books with me. And I spent a lot of time in the transit doing that, sort of learning or ingesting stories and content that had not just comics. I'd read a lot of comics at the time, and I didn't want to see how other people interpret stories. I wanted the stories first to live in my head and see how I visualize them, and then sort of as a clean conduit into how I would express them. And then when I got to school, I would do my academia, and I was trying to. We had the thing called life drawing, which is one of the universal classes that don't require. It's almost like the calisthenics of any program, even in illustration, but definitely in animation, because you need to see, there's so many things happening in life drawing that are super important. For example, you're working in 3-dimensional environment. The model stands in the center of the room, much like your IT guy here, and then you would see him or her, and you would have to extrapolate how that looks on a 2D surface. Right now, people do it with photographs, and they draw from photographs, but I think that ability to kind of see this depth perception and interpret it like how your eyes interpret the volumes and imbue that onto that 2D surface is really, really important. Additionally, you don't really need instructions for life drawing. If you spend enough time, you could just sit there and draw and draw and draw. And it's a real intimate relationship with that triangle, you to the model, or the model to you, you to the canvas that you're drawing on. And so we had life drawing as a mandatory class, which was 3 hours, I believe. But then the school offered extra life drawing as well. So these are classes that would happen in the evening from 6 to 9, I believe. And you're not capped on how many extra life drawings you can go. They encourage you to take 1 or 2. I was taking 3 or 4. So I was doing life drawing 3 hours, plus another 3 hours, plus another 3 hours. So that's 9. So 9 to 12 hours at least I was doing life drawing a lot. Just put on music and I would just draw a whole bunch. And I understand that you need to put in the work to get anything done well. And so now it's about 8, 9 o'clock, and I have another 2.5 hour commute. So sometimes I was just crashing on my friends' couches, the ones that lived on apartments or near campus, and I would just sleep there, and then I would be ready for my next class. So I had a very Spartan idea or approach to what I was doing in animation at the time. And let me steer it back to your original question.
Let me ask you another question.
Yeah.
Apart from live drawing, which I do believe and understand is a basis of everything, because, light and the way human body moves and stuff like that, you can figure it out while practicing that. But which other classes did you have? Why was that program so good? And which classes did you have other than this?
So at the time, it's now a 4-year program. So it's a degree program. At the time, it was a 3-year program that I took it. The classes there was perspective drawing. So, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. You have to be able to understand the mathematics of drawing something in 3-dimensional space, because it will not look like it sits on a plane. Character design, which is a really interesting class, because you start to learn conventions on how to design something that is appealing. And people think that appealing is subjective, but there is an objectivity to it as well. Life drawing, character design, animation. So animation is the actual, it was a classical animation program. So it means we used to draw on paper. At the time, the school had moved from right when I arrived there, we were filming stuff on the Leica camera, which is a very, it's not an old-fashioned way of doing it, but it is antiquated now. You would actually shoot your animation to film. So you would do all your drawings, shoot it to film, they would develop it, you get about a week later, and then you can review your animation. And you're like, oh, okay, is this good? From first year to second year, they migrated it to what's called a lunchbox line tester. And it looks like a big car battery. And what happens is you have your VHS, a VCR, and then a small TV, and then a camera. So this lunchbox had 3 buttons, I think. One of them is, and it's a clicker. So you click the exposure of the camera, and it would record 1 or 2 or 3 or however many times you click the button of the frames of your animation. So you would have so the way animation works is you have your paper, which is larger than a regular what's the standard here? A4, larger than A4. And then it has a special, what's called a peg bar at the bottom, which has these special pegs. So 2 round, 1 square, 1 round, 2 square on the outsides that holds the paper. So that way you can line it up and you don't get a jitter in it. And so you would film it and remove one paper, film it, click, click, because we usually shoot on 2s. And then the great thing about that is, because you're recording to VHS, you can watch your animation back almost immediately. This is an important breakthrough, because before you'd have to wait a week and see if everything worked out. But now
it's way slower and way more complex.
So that people are romantic about this idea when they talk about shooting to film versus digital, right? And I like it. I understand the romance of it, right? But fundamentally, I'm a pragmatist, right? If I can see my animation immediately, I can be way more experimental or daring with it. I can say, okay, let me just try this, because there's no inertia for trying to do it and then oh, okay, I had to do this in a week. I have to figure it out. So it was really good for trying things out really quickly. I could go to my desk, say, you know what, I'm just going to do something crazy here and shoot it. So animation was a big chunk. It was worth quite a few credits within the program. There was film language, which is a wonderful program. I'm a big fan of live action film, not just animation, which is one of the reasons I wasn't so enamored with animation. I love animation, but I love film as well. And so we did film studies as well, film language. And then there was, we're talking some 20 years ago. So what were the other programs? So there was perspective, character design, animation, film language or film study, film language, art history, which is really about animation, which is terrific. That was a great one. Kai Pindel, who was animator from Copenhagen, brilliant. He was one of my instructors at the time. And life drawing, if I didn't say that was one of the classes. I think that's it. Maybe 1 or 2 others that percolated in there.
Well, I really loved, trying to, understand the history of animation, because we were all in love with cartoons when we were kids. And it was always, for me, how did they manage to make, 1.5 hour cartoon if it takes 24 pictures for 1 second? That would mean a lot of pictures, a lot of drawings to make, 90 minutes of it.
Yeah.
And then I Googled, when we had Google and YouTube, and there were a lot of behind the scenes videos. And then I figured out, of course, one of the things is drawing the characters and stuff like that. But backgrounds and stuff, you that are not in the first focus, there's so many techniques you can use, and they are all so amazing when you look at them now, you know, using different sheets of glass to add depth.
That's a great
Even
example.
though it's a two-dimensional thing, but when you have 10 sheets of glass with different things drawn on, it still looks, in reality, it is three-dimensional, but it also looks three-dimensional. It shows depth, but also what I figured out watching cartoons, but I didn't know how they ended up making that, was that when you have these layers,
yes,
and they move at different
parallax
paces, yeah, it looks amazing,
yeah.
And it's so simple, but it's amazing. And when you know these things, and then you figure out how special effects now are done, some of the things are actually quite similar.
Yes, 100%. I think you hit the nail on the head for why I'm going to stop using that expression, but that's the physics and the drawing part that collided in the most fantastic way for me.
Optics, basically optics.
It's not optical illusion, but it really uses the way you describe that kind of, if you put this on this level and you move one at a slightly different rate than the other, it creates the illusion of parallax, that there's distance between space. Fundamentally, that's physics. There's a science to it. And I think I never thought about it before. Maybe I've had an epiphany now. But I think maybe that's why the animation part became so much more attractive to me than comic books. Because it had this extra dimension of how do you mimic life, both in its technical and its ethos, its pathos, its performance, in such a way that other people watching it will believe it, that it's real. So yeah, what you described as a multi-plane camera effect, which is amazing to think about it. They were saying, okay, how do we create depth, but we don't really have depth. So you print different, or you paint different planes, meaning, you know, if there's grass really close to the camera, what would be, and then there's trees a little bit further back, and then there's the road, and then behind that there's a hill, and way behind that there's a castle. You paint that on glass at different levels, and the glass is separated, you know, by I'm not gonna use feet, by 10 centimeters, 30 centimeters, and then you move the camera through those glass, so it actually feels like that the camera is moving that three-dimensional space, and it's genius to think about it. So this kind of marriage between science and art was really the most important part of how animation is this new medium. And not only that, you have all these different people with one collective goal, right? So you have painters who are working on the backgrounds. You have animators who are doing the animation. You have musicians who are making, that's why I think, I don't know if it still is, but definitely at the time, that animation was the highest form of art, right? So at one point, painting was the highest form of art until sculpture came around. Then sculpture was because you could experience sculpture in the round. And animation is experiencing art in 4 dimensions. So a character will be different in the beginning of the film than it will be at the end of the film, right? So that kind of 4-dimensionality where an object, in this case a character, changes over time and in space, for me is the highest form of art, also because there's all these people working on one collective goal, which is to tell the story through animation.
There's one thing, when gaming became big.
Yeah.
And when I say gaming, you know, there are a lot of studios doing mobile games.
Yeah.
Mobile games are fun.
Yeah.
No one wanted to go into gaming to do mobile games, of course. Everybody wanted to do something that's life-changing, creating their own worlds,
yeah,
living through a game, something amazing. And, you know, that's the reason why people wanted to do that. Usually it's off the table. It's not something that you can do, but if you want to do gaming, you can do these fun things and make a lot of money, and that's it. And when recently I talked to a friend and we had a brief discussion about this, why she is still interested in doing animation and she doesn't want to go into gaming.
Uh-huh.
And she did a couple of things. She did some special effects for some movies and stuff like that, but still nothing major. She's still looking for what she should be focused on. And she told me one thing which was kind of a big breakthrough for me. She said, look, if I make a cartoon or an animated something, sequence, 15 seconds, if it's cute, if it's good, if it's interesting, if it's emotional, okay, not everyone is going to react on it the same way, but it has a universal value. We can share something by looking at 15 seconds or so. With games, it can be amazing if you're good at it. If you're not good at it, it looks good, but your experience is crap.
Right.
If you play football, and now we have World Cup going on. If you play football and you're losing 6-0, you don't really care how it looks.
You're not happy about it.
Yeah, it's 4K, it's HDR, it's lovely. I'm still losing. I don't really care. And with the fact that, we grew up watching games that had pixels the size of a finger.
Right.
And it was amazing because the story was so good. We, drew the details. We figured out in our heads everything else. If it was popular, it had to have an amazing story behind it. Now, usually, it just looks good or cute, especially with mobile gaming. It's good, cute. It will, help you waste 10 minutes waiting in the line, which is all fine, which is all cute, which all makes money in the end, which all helps you, gain popularity or whatever. But in 50 years, no one's going to care. And you can still watch cartoons that are from 50 years ago and they're amazing.
Yeah.
Even short films or something like that. Yes, the things have changed. Now you have way more details. Now it's far more realistic. Now, doesn't matter. It's still amazing. If you watch classic Disney, it's still amazing.
Agreed.
If you watch what Pixar did 30 years ago, it's beyond amazing because the story is ridiculously good. And animation is there to help tell that story.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have the perfect, glow on the metallic surface, I can add that up in my head.
Right.
But if I have to make up the story, that's going to be a lot tougher. That requires more processing power.
Well, I think they're connected. They're slightly two different things for me. I am a storyteller. This when people say, because even when I draw, I don't have a particular style that I say, what am I drawing? What's the story behind it? And what's the particular voice that tells it best, right? So I adapt my style, which is a very animation thing to do. I adapt my style of drawing something to what the subject matter is that I'm drawing. So I change it up so that way it feels like one recipe, right? But the story of it is, frankly, the most important part to me. I think that if the story is king and solid, you are way more forgiving with the look of it. And if you don't have a story, then you focus completely on spectacle and it's never enough. It's almost like, this could be a little bit better. And at the end of the day, it's not memorable or look, as humans, we are storytellers and story consumers. We since almost the beginning of time, that's how we learn everything in life, right? It's through the idea of myth, the storytelling. You can hear the story and then, isn't life amazing, or isn't life tragic, or it's better to have loved and lost than never have to have love at all. But all these wrapped up in story allows us to learn that in such a way that it resonates inside of us. And animation has a distinct, or its distinction of starting from a place where you're not already making judgments. So if you're watching this is the challenge in film, is you're watching a film, you immediately start to say, okay, this is how this thing is, or person or actor or environment is different than me, right? You're looking and you're like, okay, I get it. And if it's a good story, you'll eventually absorb it and empathize, right? In animation, you're starting with something that's very different than you, right? It could be a character like Bambi, for example. Bambi's a deer who lives in the forest, and that has no one has been a deer before, right? And so, but by that first act, which is called suspension of disbelief, right? It says, okay, I'm not a deer, and deers don't talk, but I'm willing to suspend my disbelief as long as the team or the whoever's making the film plays by the rules they set out in the beginning, right? Bambi doesn't immediately start to fly, right? Where it's like, okay, well, that's bizarre, right? As long as they stick to the rules they set up, you will let this little fawn into your heart quicker than you would have let some other character as a person or in live action playing this. And once that happened, it lives in you forever. I mean, it stays there. And this is really the power of animation. And it's one of the questions I always ask when I'm looking at animations is, why is this animated? So this story you're telling me, right? Why do you want to do this through animation? And it should be one of the reasons is like, it can't be done any other way. If they say, it's cheaper to do this way, I says, well, this is a big, this is going to be a monumentous task to do an animation to do it well, because you're going to have to convince me about this world building that you're doing. So whenever I hear a story about animation, I says, well, why are you doing this animation? And if the answer is something good, because there is no other way but animation to do it, I was like, okay, the foundation, the groundwork is there. Now, back to the game part of it. There's an interesting, and it's happening more in film and television, and I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. I haven't got an opinion, but there was something about going to the movies, and animation was consumed this way. And Saturday morning, I was watching it with my siblings or my cousins. And it's called a shared human experience. So if we're all watching a movie or an animated movie, and we are collectively scared or collectively happy, that is contagious. And not only contagious, it amplifies the feeling within you. So if everyone in the theater is laughing at something that they see that's funny on the screen, it's amplified in you. And I love that shared human experience. I'm almost sad in COVID fully expressed on how mandatory this human connection is. Not even touching people, but being in the presence of other people. I think that games is the other direction. I mean, there's been movements for games to be more collective through massive multiplayer online, but that shared human experience is being taken away and pushed into the personal experience of you and connection with the game. And I don't know if that's the best yet. I don't know if that's, I mean, there's some wonderful games with some wonderful storytelling in them, and it moves you in such a way that's personal as well, but it lacks that shared human experience, and it lacks the guide. Like someone who I have an idea of, Ivan, this is what I've learned about life from my own experience, right? And it's very specific to all the different ingredients that made up my life, like my dad being Fred Flintstone, fixing stuff, etc. And there are probably some things that people can connect with, but I have a particular way, a particular accent, a particular feeling about it that is novel, interesting, and hopefully resonates with other people. And by me creating an animated film, you get to see that with me guiding you through it. And playing it as a game, you kind of have to stumble around until you get it. And so there's many different distractions and detours that kind of dilute that feeling or message that I want to kind of express to you, or we collectively want to express to you. And I think gaming is a different experience than storytelling in its purest form. So that's kind of how I feel about it. I mean, I love to play games. I get completely absorbed in it. But there's, especially from my childhood, there's animated movies, TV shows, or cartoons that have such a profound impact on me in terms of how it was, that it's really difficult for the games to have that kind of same resonance.
I can understand that perfectly, but I would like to add one more thing, because I think it's an important topic. I already mentioned Minions because, for obvious reasons, I look like one of them, and I love them.
Yeah.
But the most amazing thing for me about Minions, and it's not the first time, it's been around through history of animation, animated movies, but with them, I think it's the most prominent. It's right there in front of you.
Yeah.
They hear one word. They only know banana. Everything else is gibberish.
Yeah.
And you perfectly understand them in any language.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. The fact that it's completely universal, and banana is universally loved fruit, of course, but the fact that you feel all the things they are going through with their huge eyes, and they don't say a word that makes sense.
No.
They say a lot of things, but it doesn't really make sense. I mean, I love guinea pigs. Everyone,
Like the animal guinea pig?
yes, everyone who knows me knows I love guinea pigs.
Why?
Because they're so cute and they have an amazing face.
Okay.
All gerbils and stuff like that, they have rat face.
Yeah.
Guinea pigs, they have human face with lips and nose and big eyes.
Okay.
They can show all emotions.
Right.
I don't know if I'm reading them well. I mean, it's guinea pig. It's not a human. But it's amazing. It's so adds so much depth
to the guinea pig.
to the guinea pig.
Interesting.
And the way I'm using guinea pig as something
allegory
to compare, because when I look at Minions, I see guinea pigs.
Huh.
When I see guinea pigs, I see humans. And I'm weird, I know.
No, I'm following you.
But the whole idea now, 10 years ago, making animated cartoon was all about getting the animal or a human, well, not a human probably, but the animal, the object to be as realistic as possible.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't have to be like that.
No.
It can be completely abstract and still be beyond amazing in every way imaginable. 2 years ago, something like that, I watched I think it's called Soul.
Yeah.
That's deeper than most of feature films I've seen. And of course, the animation, the characters are really cute. The world is amazing. Everything is like, but a lot of things are done by lines on screen representing some, paperclip dancing. We all have our own horrors from paperclip dancings in Microsoft Office.
Yeah.
But basically, this is what it is. Lines form details of a certain face. It tells a story, and it's some higher power or something like that. And you look at it, and it's amazing. And anyone can draw it on paper, and it won't be amazing.
No.
But here, it's amazing. Why? Because it tells a story, it shows emotion. And I guess it takes a lot of skill to do these things.
Tons.
And I guess it takes a lot of feel to do these things right.
I think intuition plays a big role. I think you're creating everything from scratch. And it's a lot of work to do that. Beyond being expensive, it's a lot of work. So the idea is it's going to be a big endeavor. Let's get it right before we start doing it. And I think that's a big motivation. So when you're doing it, it says, what am I moved by this yet? Does this fully explain what, or does this harness the emotion that we want to communicate? Because if it doesn't, it's going to take a lot of work to get there, and it's going to be like it's going to be a arduous way of doing it. And so I completely agree that abstraction, people have this kind of face recognition. You look at American, not so much Europe, but North American light sockets have these two little slits and a little mouth. The longest time as a kid, I thought, oh, that's a face. Like it's the
most popular hanger design in wardrobes and stuff like that looked like octopus.
Was it?
Yeah, for us it was octopus, and everyone when you remember when we did physical exercise in elementary school. Oh, the octopuses.
Yeah.
For everyone, it's
the same one. They all have the octopus.
Yeah, everywhere.
So we do
in
that.
Schools
we do that as people. We project. Like you did with the guinea pig, you project your own kind of persona into the object, or in this case, guinea pigs. How do you feel about capybaras? Have you seen them before?
Of course, they're amazing. I played with a couple of them in Japan.
I figured, because they're like a guinea pig.
Huge.
Yeah, but they have that same face. So the Minions, which is interesting, they don't have a vocabulary other than banana, but it does this. Speaking and action you have text and subtext, right? So you have what someone, I always use this example. I don't know. Let's hope this is a primetime one. It's not going to be rude, but let's say there's a couple that have been on 3 dates. Let's keep them a little bit conservative. And the lady invites the guy upstairs. Would you like to come upstairs for coffee, right? And it's 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., right? So that's the text, what she's saying. Would you like to come upstairs for coffee? That's not the subtext, right? I suspect that they could have found coffee anywhere and not just in the apartment. And hopefully coffee will lead into coffee in the morning as well. And so this play on subtext and text is nuanced for people. It's very interesting. It's a little bit more sophisticated though, right? Usually you need to understand what is said and what is meant. And the minions have this purism to them, right? Because you don't understand what they're saying. You understand the cadence, like if they're angry, upset, etc. It's called Gramalot, right? So this language. There was a show in the 70s called, it was actually an interstitial called La Linea. Yeah. I don't know if it was popular in Serbia, of course. But he was Italian, but he never said anything in Italian. And so it was this cadence and nuance. And so I love shows that have Gramalot or this kind of vocabulary. Our show, Puffin's Impossible, uses this kind of vocalization because for what you said, you don't need any particular language to understand it. 2, you don't need to understand text and subtext. I mean, the older you get, for very sophisticated or very complex storytelling, something like, I don't think Quentin Tarantino or Robert Altman would be able to, or not they wouldn't be able, I don't think they would be attracted to this kind of storytelling. But when you want to get a pure emotional feeling resonance with the kids or audience that's watching it, it doesn't even have to just be kids. This idea of not having to contend with actual words, meaning, and saying, I love it. And you can still have the cadence with the minions. You know if they're upset, you know if they're even being sarcastic in what they're saying, but you have no idea what they're talking about.
And even when they say banana, there's like 500 different ways they're going to say that word. And every time they say it, you know exactly how they feel.
That's amazing, isn't it?
That's beyond amazing. Anyway, let's get back to your schooling and your professional work. So when you finished your degree, where did you go on from there?
So I finished a classical animation program, and I went to work in some of the local studios in and about Toronto, which is where I was. And so I was working on some 2D animation stuff, and I was also working on some 3D layout part of the show. So if for those not familiar with it, in the CG animation process, you have many different departments that do many different things. One of the departments, when it goes from storyboards to 3D, you have 2 branches. One is to create the assets. So all the characters, locations, and objects need to be created in 3D and given, if we were using puppets, they need to be given digital strings that they can be manipulated. The other part is, in the animatic, is imagine it like a movie. You have to animate the camera. The camera has to behave in such a way that you would move it like a digital camera. In traditional film, it's called blocking, right? So what happens in layout is you bring in all the objects, those assets that I said that make up the scene, and then you put your camera in there and you put information with the camera. So what type of lens it's going to, in the digital camera, it mimics real life fairly closely. And so you put in your, you put in the focal length, like how the camera is going to capture the image. You position the camera, so if it's an up shot, down shot, and if the camera has any movement to it, so if it was a panning shot or if it's a crane up or crane down, you animate those keys as per the length of that storyboard excerpt that you've received from your department head. Additionally, you bring in the characters and the set, and you put the camera where it needs to be in the set. And if the characters they will have animation. You're going to put keys. Keys are specific moments of the character's performance that have a particular position. So if I was sitting on a chair and getting up to grab a cup of coffee, you have a key of me sitting, so that's one position. You have a key of me standing, that's another position. You have a key of maybe 2 or 3 keys of me walking, and then another key of me grabbing the coffee. And it kind of has the performance timing that's in the storyboard that's going to help the animator know how much time they have to do it. So that's what layout department was doing. And I was working in layout department for one of the studios, and I was doing pretty good. At the same time, I was learning. I hadn't learned 3D in school.
Digital 3D.
Yeah, digital 3D animation in school. I did the classical animation program. So I have been doing a few classes and a lot of it self-taught. And I was always pretty good with computers anyways. And so picking up it's actually much more difficult to learn animation than, I know this may seem obvious, but the art of animation is exponentially more difficult than the art of learning how to use a computer program, right? I would say anyone even of my generation and later had a computer in their house, so they would know at least how to operate it. And so I was kind of learning CG on the job as I was doing it. And so I had worked on a few shows, and then I was working on a Care Bears. Do you remember Care Bears?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And so they had done a Care Bears movie, and I was working in the layout department. And the studio, the studio I was working on had not the whole film, but they were getting a larger portion from, the studio was called Nelvana at the time, which was a very large studio in Canada. And I think they became Chorus afterwards. And at one point, they wanted me to go and lead the team on site in Nelvana. And so, which wasn't that far. I mean, it was maybe, the actual geography was maybe, I don't know, 300 meters from the studio we were working in. And so I had brought a small team. I wouldn't say they were the B crew, but they were more misfits or ragtag group of us. I don't know what that says for my leadership, but I went on and I was working doing that. And it went well. It went super well. It taught me a little bit about working with a team. Not just being a participant in the team, but having some sort of stewardship or some sort of, I wouldn't say management, but some sort of lead in how everything's going to get organized, how we're going to deliver. It wasn't so big, but it was working on that. I had done it same studio before. I had done some animation part of a pitch. I don't remember the show right now, and a variety of other tasks that I was capable of doing it. One interesting one was, there's an artist called Darren Donovan he has a twin brother called Jeff Donovan. They're two twin animators. He's an animation, and Jeff is a background painter, and they're identical twins. And Darren was working in DreamWorks before he came back to Canada. So he was Canadian. There was this big migration during the mid-90s from Canada to work in the States. In fact, a lot of the people from Sheridan ended up being directors, or you'll see that my alumni and alumni ahead of me and just ahead of that are all in Pixar, DreamWorks. Some have gone on to be directors. It was a very good school. And Darren had gone over to California to work at DreamWorks. And he's a special effects, 2D special effects, which is a very, very different beast than character animation. And so Darren came back, and we were working on, I don't remember the project, but he was the 2D effects lead on it. And I was doing in-betweening and assisting on him, which is something I hadn't done in a long time. And it was a terrific learning experience. He's a really gracious person, really super cool. And I had learned a lot. So I was doing a little bit, my big thing was the layout department, but any other little project I could jump into, I would jump on, I'd volunteer. I had 2D animation training beforehand as well. So if I could do it, I could jump on. So I was doing that for a few years, I think. And then I connected with, so there was this Christmas film that required animation of a reindeer like Bambi, but a little bit different. And I ran into a friend we were both in the same program. We were classmates, or colleagues in the program, in the faculty. And he was working on it, and he asked me to do some designs. I'm a pretty good designer. It's probably one of my most fun part to do, going back to that comic. Remember, I was drawing those characters on the paper. So he wanted me to do the designs for this Christmas film that had animation in it. And we hadn't connected in a few years, and I had done it, and he loved them. He loved them a lot. And he says, what are you doing? And I told him what I was doing. He says, he says, I have my own studio. It's boutique right now. He goes, would you be open to, he didn't even say it like that. He says, I want you to be the art director for the studio. And so I was like, I was thinking about it at the time, and I was like, Yeah. So we formed this, and he offered me partial partnership at the time. It was brand new starting, and so it was, we became. I became a percentage partner within the studio, and there were 4 original partners. So him and his now wife, then girlfriend. She was a producer. He was the director, creative director. I came in as art director, and then we had a technical director who was made the 4th member. And so we essentially, he started the studio, but it was relatively smaller, and then we kind of galvanized the studio into being more of a boutique studio. So I came on board and worked as the art director. That was a super interesting time in my life. I was with there for 10 years. We did so many things. We did a lot of commercial work. So we did some stuff for film as well, smaller project. Most of it evolved into work for commercials, advertising, that kind of stuff, which is, I don't know if it's grueling. It's a very specific skill. It's a very specific market, and it requires high expertise, high pressure, and we were working on that. One of my particular talents or abilities is that I'm also really good at drawing storyboards really fast. So when we were shooting commercials, or the directors would shoot commercials, some of it would have visual effects, which is some of the stuff that we were also doing. And I would go on set, and when we had to deviate from the actual shooting, whatever we're shooting, or it had to be done quickly, or even before, I would draw the storyboards of what the commercial is. But additionally, I would also do shooting boards. So what that is you'd have to shoot certain things for visual effects in such a way that all these pieces form or synthesize back into what you're doing, right? I know always people think special or visual effects is a science, and it very much is so, but it's really a magic trick. I think this idea is that at the end of the day, it's all fake. And there's nothing outside the camera that matters. I mean, now with lighting and everything, you have to set it up. But at that time, especially, it's a magician is all about where you're looking at. What are you looking at one point? And if you get just the right pieces,
shifting focus.
Yeah, exactly. If you line up just the right pieces, you believe it. And that's all I care about. It doesn't have to be real. I'm not an architect. No one's going to die in the building I build, right? It just has to look real. And so I was really good at that. And I understood how to make something, what pieces you need, and how to organize that beforehand to make sure it works in visual effects. And then learning the program wasn't so difficult. I mean, it is difficult, but if you have an acumen for programs and for doing it, you can kind of pick it up. And so I was moving a little bit into this kind of, and I was in compositing. So I was doing a lot of comp work as well, because these commercials and some TV shows we took on later required that. And I was strong in that compositing part. So I'd moved into being a partner in a studio, and we were doing any project that excited us at the time. There's so much more to that, though. You've asked a really interesting question. I got to work on my first feature film with them as well. There was a Mexican writer called Danny Sadia, and he had been nominated for an Academy Award for a short film called Genesis 3:19. And it's a story about a Jewish man who finds out he has cancer and he's going to die. So uplifting film already, right? And he finds out, and he wants a way to live on, like, he wants a legacy. And he concocts this interesting idea where he's going to be cremated and convinces his friends to drink him or something. It gets a little bit bizarre. But in that idea, it talks about seriality or synchronicity. And it gets heavy with The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which is Condon's book. But within the story, there are 2 stories. One of a guy called Évariste Galois, who was a French mathematician, and Paul Kammerer, who is a Austrian, evolutionist, like Darwin. He actually would have been the next Darwin if it wasn't for the sabotaging of his assistant. And it was going to be all animated in this film. And we have some visual effects within the film as well. Like, they have to look real visual effects. So I was the production designer for this project. I met with the director. I met with our contact, who was kind of like the creative director, but he had lent he leaned more of us to do it. And we created some of these mood boards really early on. The mood boards that I created, I was working on them, caught the attention of Guillermo del Toro, who is also Mexican. And at the time, I'd been interested in this project. I was supposed to meet with them, but this creative director didn't want me to meet with them, which was sad for me. And I said, but I really want to explain exactly what the thought process is behind this, right? I didn't want to dilute. I didn't want to tell someone and then that person tell someone, right? Because I think we would have spoken the same language. Ironically, he said, it's all going to be in Mexican, so we're not speaking, or Spanish, we're not going to be speaking the same language, right? And they met, and Guillermo, what he told me, he says that Guillermo was really interested in it. He says, but he's working on his own project right now, and he's going to track this film and see how it follows, but it isn't something that he can jump on right now as well. So, which is fine. I was a production designer for this film, and it was my first foray into building. We scaled up the studio to do all the animation. It was about 25 minutes of animation required for the film. It was 2D and 3D hybrid. It was to mimic sort of shadow puppets of Mexican culture at the time. You'll see Guillermo uses it later on in one of the Hellboy films. I'll point it out to you if you're interested, and I can show you where the influence is. It also had a 3D character that was made to look 2D. And so we filmed in Valencia, Spain, for part of the production. And then we finished the film, like all the post in Mexico City. So myself and my creative partner at the time were flown down to Mexico City, and we worked out of Olin Studio, which is a very large facility. They were working on Zodiac at the time, and we had a small division just working on our film. And I lived at the director's house. It was a really big house, and we were there in Mexico City, working on this film. It did pretty good, and it ended up in the Santa Barbara Film Festival, which was awesome. It was the first film festival that any film that I'd worked on was going, and we went there. So the four of us, the four partners, went there, and there was a panel discussion with Brad Bird, Julian Schnobel. Do you know who he is? He did a movie called Basquiat, and he's got a bunch of them. He's a painter as well in New York, but he's also a filmmaker. Greg Gillespie, who did Lars and the Real Girl at the time. Jason Reitman, who had just finished Juno. Judd Apatow from Superbad and Knocked Up, and I think that was the whole cast. And since we were in the same, our film was in contention, we got to speak with them, and I spoke to Brad, and I asked him. Brad Bird is director of The Incredibles, but even before that, he had done Iron Giant, which is a masterpiece. Unfortunately, it had poor marketing, and they didn't stand behind it, but it's still to this day one of my favorite 2D animated movies, especially of the era. And I asked Brad, I said, this is before he got on to work at Pixar, I think. Or maybe just after he started The Incredibles. Anyways, I said, Brad, his career is something I looked up to. It was amazing. And I said, how is it that you find yourself working on, other than being excellent and amazing and kick ass at this, how do you find yourself working on stuff that pushes the next step forward? He goes, and he says, it's really simple. He says, do more of the stuff you love and less of the stuff you don't. And I said, well, okay, that's a fortune cookie, right? So, and I thought it was an oversimplification, but I later learned that it wasn't. It really is the adage for being successful in something that requires you to give a lot of your expertise and your passion towards. Do more of the stuff you love and less of the stuff you don't, because if you're chasing something that other people love, you don't know if you're going to hit it, right? If I think, okay, I think Even will like this show about rollerblading babes who fight crime in the nighttime, right? Which is a great idea, actually. You can use that. But I don't know if I don't like it. I'm guessing you'll like it, right? Or if I'm chasing, I think this is going to make me a lot of money. I'm just spending time making money, and the time is actually worth more than the money in the long run. But if I'm doing more of the stuff I love, and I have an expertise in it, but I mean, you should be try and be good at the stuff you love. If I'm doing more of the stuff I love, I assume inevitably I'm not such a weirdo because other people will love it too, or at least like it. And if I do it well with some sort of expertise and some sort of integrity and some sort of quality of excellence, because I love it, it will also garner attention and money, whatever you're chasing. I think it should be a byproduct, not the goal to make money doing it, especially if you're an artist. And so do more of the stuff you love and less of the stuff you don't. And so I kind of tried to make that my mantra. At that same time, during that the Santa Barbara Film Festival, I don't think we won the award there, but the film did win at the Madrid Film Festival. We connected with a guy called Graham Perkins, who had been working with Adobe and Apple, and he's a Brit who was living in Singapore. So he was an expat. So he's for quite a few, and he was super interested in what we were doing, and he was looking to involve himself in animation in this new studio. And through various talks with him, we eventually set up another studio in Singapore. So we had our creative hub in Toronto, and we had another technology-focused studio in Singapore. So I don't know if Graham made the connection or we did first, but we had connected with, do you know what Pepper's Ghost is? Have you heard this technology before? Yeah. Okay, so Pepper's Ghost it's a magician's trick, and remember, all of it is magicians, where if you angle a mirror at a 45-degree angle, and we, in this case, project something. If you stand at a particular viewing angle, it looks like whatever that you're projecting from the side is in that mirror. So this optical illusion happens if you open a window at like a 45-degree angle. Sometimes at nighttime, you can kind of see a reflection. People get scared shitless with this, excuse my French. They see it, they're like, oh my God, someone's in the house. It's like, no, it's just me, right?
Basically, that's the technology they use now to emulate, what's it called? The holograms. Well, that's basically.
Yeah, it's exactly where. So Pepper's Ghost is what they use in the Haunted Mansion in Disney World when they did it. And so around, I think it was late 80s, early 90s, an inventor in Abu Dhabi created it's called a foil, but what it is it's like a cellophane that if you look at it at a particular angle, it's see-through, it's transparent. But at a particular inflection angle, it's completely reflective. So what you do is, and I'm not going to go through the whole setup, but if you create a projector that hits it at a particular angle and I stand at a different angle, I see everything invisible except what's even being projected. And that's what the holographic technology is, right? And so they used it in 2006, I think, on MTV. Madonna appeared with the Gorillaz, the animated band. And she appeared with them, and they use the same technology. So we licensed that technology, and we started to use it in Singapore. We had a few clients at the time, and we were talking to, I wonder if I can even talk about this now. I don't even know if because I since left that studio, but we had an MOU with MGM Casino to do a dinosaur zoo. So we were going to create CG dinosaurs. In fact, we did a proof of concept with a T-Rex. One of the guys that we were working with, he was the lead modeler on Journey to the Center of the Earth. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It's with Brendan Fraser. And within that movie, there's a T-Rex. I don't know how much trouble I'm going to get into, but we basically took that model and made it way better he was the lead modeler, and we took it, and then we had a CG version of it. And so in our studio in Singapore, we built it was a large facility. The ceilings were quite high. We built a Musion theater and did a proof of concept of this dinosaur within it. And it was good. It was super cool. I'm leaving so much stuff out. I was nominated for Best Music Director for there's all these, and I've won a bunch of FWAs, which is Favorite Website Award. During my time at this studio. I don't remember when the chronology of this was, but there was a lot of awesome, exciting stuff happening at the time. So I was doing stuff that I love. So we did this one with we were doing this MOU with with MGM, and we had the startings of what will be this dinosaur zoo. I also went over to Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, and I was a keynote speaker in KL in Kuala Lumpur. Yeah, okay, because it was about that. We did a CG music video that had some characters, and so I was speaking about in that event, and then I spoke at CG Overdrive. This is around 2008 or 2009, and so I went a few times back and forth to Singapore, and around the same time is when the market crashed. Am I boring you yet?
No.
Okay, good. So the market crashed, and Singapore became, or at least the government bodies that we were dealing with, became a bit xenophobic. They really wanted 51% of the studio to be located in the borders of Singapore, and it was an interesting time for me because I'd have to make a decision to move to Singapore. And my son was 2 or 3 years old, 2 years old. And if I moved to Singapore, he would become a resident. This is one of the things I was thinking. He would become a citizen, and he would have to do mandatory military service in Singapore. And they do it in the Malaysian jungle, right? And so I was like, I don't know about this. And so I didn't end up moving to Singapore. And through a variety of different actions that the Musion also, the system that has that 3D holographic technology requires you to fulfill a certain amount of events with it. So you have to keep their brand identity high, you have to do it. I think at the time it was 8 or 9 events, like concerts, etc., right? On top of the licensing fee of that technology. So it's the licensing technology at the time was, I think it was $120,000 per year, which is it's not cheap for a boutique studio. And then on top of it, you have to do either 6 or 9 events, which could easily run you about $200,000 or $300,000 a year. It was becoming an expensive endeavor, and we were still just in the early stages of talking with the casino about doing this thing, and so a few things didn't gel or coalesce like they should, and we ended up closing down the Singapore division of our company, and which was the technologies part, and we just stayed within Toronto. Interesting note though, we garnered the attention of Cirque du Soleil. Do you know who they are?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I've had to explain this before, which is amazing. I love Cirque du Soleil. I think it's fantastic. Cirque du Soleil is the not brainchild, but the birth of Guy Lafontaine, who was a street performer, who ended up becoming a billionaire. And they want one of the things that we were developing, which was based on this. This property that we were vested in, we were in talks with them to develop a show around this, like a Cirque du Soleil show. And so I went to their Montreal headquarters. They have Montreal is a city 5 hours away from Toronto where I was living. And they have a headquarters in Montreal. And it is like a, Willy Wonka, Charlie, it's like that inside. They have like 3 layers of security that you have to get through. And then once you're through, it's like
Disneyland.
Yeah, it's he has, this is so horrible. I'm going to say it because I'm sure no one's going to hear me say it. I can't, inside they have a circus. Like they have an interior version of a circus tent with all the performers. And I was looking, and I came in, they were giving us a tour. And when I came into the first room, there's this tiny little boy and a tiny little woman or girl. But they look odd from the back. They're performers, right? They look really weird. And the boy turns, and it's a man with a full mustache. But he's only like this big, right? Like he's tiny, but he's not a dwarf or anything. It's almost like as if you took a human and you scaled them down, like you just shrunk them down. The hands are perfect, crazy, right? And so they were from some remote village in Uzbekistan or wherever they were from, but they were tiny little people, like really this Charlie and the Chocolate Factory effect, right? I don't want to call them Oompa Loompas. And they were brilliant. Once they started doing they let us watch the performance. They were acrobats, and they did things I didn't even think human people, like I didn't think it was possible. And so it was amazing. It was fantastic. At the top of the building, they have this big, it's this siphon or cylinder that collects rainwater, and it purifies it, and then it's drinkable within the facility. There's in the hallways, there's priceless pieces of art that you would think would be in a museum, but I guess Guy Lafontaine just put them up throughout the hallways. And I was walking around. I was like, "Can I touch this?" It's like, "Yeah, you can touch it. We prefer if you didn't." But it was crazy. It was amazing. And so we were just starting talks with them, to create a show. They actually have a very small creative team. I always thought, because it's a big production if you've ever seen it, but they want to start with a very small, intimate team for that story development. And they said, "Okay, we're just wrapping up shows. Let's meet back in a few months to see what you guys come up with." While we were doing that, this is where the story kind of goes a little bit pear-shaped, because we were doing a lot of commercial work, so I was telling you, right? So we're still doing that work. And I used to have my own projects. So I was given stewardship over my own project, where I would work with it, and I'd get a small team, and I would build my own budgets, etc. And they were working well. I was really good at that kind of stuff, building the creative and building how to make it financially viable. Like, we can do it and we make money on it. My partners, they used to get bigger projects, but they tend to be way more ambitious. And I just think that they lack the kind of producer acumen to make a good project. And so what would happen is they would overextend the team and the project. And in the end, I would be pulled back into working on the project. I think I mentioned this before, didn't I? Mm-hmm. And so, the relationship deteriorated a little bit. I was working a lot. And
it's not fun having to save the show every time.
No, exactly. You can't build it with that model.
It's fine. People make mistakes. People, don't judge things properly.
Right.
It's fine. But doing it every time, it means the system is broken.
It's habitual, right? I had done exactly what you just said. I had done it too many times, and the mental health of my two partners was deteriorating. So they would take mental health breaks. They left, and they were a couple, so they would leave the country, and it would be left on me to kind of keep the lights on and the door open, right? And so I'm a solid person. I don't like to complain about things. I'm solutions oriented, and I was irritated. I wasn't taking mental health breaks, and I was working one time. And so the reason I mention is because my business partner, I was working on it was about 3 or 4 in the morning, and my business partner had left at around midnight, and he had gone to sleep, and it's his project. And I'm working on this project, and it's 4 in the morning. I had one car at the time, and I have to leave where I'm working at around 7 a.m. to go to pick up my son and drop him off at school, and then drive back. And I'm thinking I had that quote, I think, written down. It says, "Do more of the stuff you love and less of the stuff you don't." And I was looking and I was like, I'm not loving this. And I haven't been loving what I've been working on for at least the last 6 months. I was really unhappy. And I was thinking, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this, right? And I was really upset. And I was, my business partner who had created this problem that I was working to solve, which is fine. I'm Team Skirad, right? Has gone. He's left. He went to sleep. And I couldn't go to sleep, or I chose not to go to sleep to help out. And I was so angry. And I don't think I said this in the thing, but there was another project, and I don't think I've ever said this publicly, but my producer who was sitting behind me, she had written something about fire. I don't remember what it was, but she said, "Pete, blah, 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 blah." Instead of saying "hello, Peter" or whatever, she said "Pete, comma." Even it's such a minor thing. My name is Peter. I don't introduce myself as Pete. It's not that I don't like it. I don't prefer it if I'm going to do it. I let people who call me it, who have already called me it, continue. But when I introduce myself, I don't say my name is Pete. I don't use it. I use Peter. And this email was chastising me, right? Basically, it was chastising me about something. It was really passive aggressive. But that first thing
Best kind of email.
I hate those emails. And that the person's behind me, like she's maybe 4 or 5 desks behind me. So you could have just said it. But anyways, it said Pete. And then blah, 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 blah. And it was this Pete thing that just like, do you know what I mean? Like that straw, like this effing thing, right? I was just like, and I was like, nope. I basically flipped the keyboard, pushed the monitor over, shut the computer down. I said, I'm done. I checked out and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm done. And so I walked away from that relationship. I basically I didn't try and chase my percentage of partnership. I didn't do anything. I walked away from that relationship, and I said I'm not doing this anymore. I'll figure something else that'll make me happy. This is not what I love. So I ended that partnership. So it was like 10 years worth of work that I said is enough. So I closed that door.
When I look at your CV, basically, there are so many things you've done. And of course, part of this comes from that period. A lot of it comes from that period because you were doing so many different things, which is really good for, building skill set and stuff like that. Doing different things, working on different things, different complexities and stuff like that is really good to develop a skill set that's easily adaptable to pretty much anything anyone can throw at you. I also deeply believe that, good generalists in terms of working on something, people who actually know the whole process and can do maybe not the best work, but can pretty much fit into any role in this process, are so valuable because they're, I wouldn't say they are necessarily authorities to everyone, but when you know the work and speak to a person, they respect that. It's not like, throwing tasks at them and throwing shit at them and you know nothing about how it works. You don't know nothing about how much time it takes, how complex it is. When you do, it's very different. And also, when you do, if you are good at pretty much every step of the process, you can help people grow into their position. If they are not ready for that now, but they have talent, they have huge potential and stuff like that, which is something we all look for when trying to hire a young person, they need someone to mentor them through the process. To be able to do that, you need to have specific knowledge, but also the bigger picture.
Right.
That comes from working on a ton of different projects. That comes from crazy deadlines. That comes from, no one would figure out an interesting new way of solving things if they had proper time and budget.
Right.
Everyone would do it the classical way because everyone has done it like that past 50 years.
Yeah, why risk it?
But when you have, 20 days to do 60 days of work, you have to be creative.
Yeah.
And when you have budget worth of 20 days and you need 60 days of work, you still have to figure out a way how to do it to make it still possible, even though some things are going to be left behind, some things are going to drop out and they're not going to be used, but helps you find focus, helps you find helps you separate what's important from what is not. You mentioned some of the projects. Mm-hmm. Were there any other projects prior to your current situation, what you're working on, which will be the final piece for this podcast? But during this time, were there any other projects that were special for you in some way? It doesn't have to be big deal. People can Google you and read your biography. It's amazing. But, what were the projects that were very, very important for you during that time?
During this time period?
That and what came after.
Well, let me. There are a whole bunch, but during this time period, there was an interesting one. To your point, what I tried to do, or what we tried to do, but it was mainly is that if we have a big project coming up that's going to need some innovation or some new way of thinking about it, we tried to find a smaller project with less budget, more creative control, that we could try out this idea. And if it works, we can...
A guinea pig project.
Yeah. A guinea pig project. We come back to the guinea pig. Eh? You've been working... We set that up way back. Yeah. So a guinea pig project where we can try and experiment a lot, make a lot of mistakes and be adventurous and bold. And then once we say, okay, this is going to work, let's scale this up and do it on the larger scale project. So I'm trying to remember which one came first. So we were working on some production VFX and animation for a puppet show. It was like so it's a puppet show, but it's on TV. So the characters are like the Muppets, but thing. And part of that, we figured on how to track the puppets. So that way we could do something, add something particular onto the puppet. And when we did it, we said, okay, let's experiment with this. We had another project come in for, it was for a large government project. We won the FWA for this one as well. It was a large government project for drug awareness. And it was an eyeball, right? So it's like an eyeball that is in this kind of test room that you would give this eyeball different drugs, and it would react to those drugs, but like really fantastical, right? So I'm trying to remember where there were a bunch. There were like 30 different types of animation. It was like it looked like a military facility, right? So on this puppet one, we figured that we could track the puppet. And in what we were doing, this is a really, really early version of almost like mocap, but an entirely different. So it's not mocap though, because mocap is the performer doing it. But we liked the immediacy of, I don't even think they do it today, right? So here's how we did it. So we like the immediacy of, you know, when you're performing with the puppet, like this thing, it kind of, so we could get all the performance. And what we did on this, so we built this small stage within our studio, and then we had a performer perform as the puppet. He had this like, it's an eyeball that floats, right? But realistic looking eyeball, so it was CG. And so the performer would do this eyeball, and we had LED lights, and then we filmed it with 3 cameras, so we could triangulate what it was. So what would happen is, we had a CG model of the eyeball, a CG version. We had this puppet version with these LEDs, and then we had all the cameras capturing the data so that we could track it in 3-dimensional space. Yeah. So what we were able to do is we were able to get all the performance real time, like this live, but as a puppeteer. And then we brought those keys or that data into the computer, and then add everything that you couldn't do in CG, like the eye blinks and the pupil dilating and everything like that. And so we were able to get lots of animation footage and different performances and takes. We were watching it and we could see it and be like, make him a little bit more schizo, or more, he's just done cocaine or something, right? So he's got to be very jittery, right? And that was an awesome project. I think it was our first FWA for that, for Favorite Website Award, because the results were amazing once you saw it. And it had this voiceover, like, I think his name was Earl. It was like, Earl, can you, and it was a really interesting idea and even to this day, it bridged 2 worlds of animation that I really like. So if you ever watch, Jim Henson is probably I can't even think of other puppets that come close, but Jim Henson's workshop of puppets, watch his commercials, the early day commercials, because they're mental. He used to do these coffee ads with the first days of. So the performance that Jim Henson, Frank Oz, those kind of team did with puppets was so immediate, especially if you had a person and a puppet, because there's this kind of like playing music where there's this being in the moment for animation, which is not animation. Animation is all about iterative process and doing things over and over again. And this type of animation was so immediate, so temporal, so of the now, that puppet animation still looks great. And especially if you have 2 dynamics. So we're able to capture that, the performance, so do multiple takes until we get what we want. And then add all the stuff that you couldn't do on the spot in post, in CG. And we only came to that kind of ingenious way of doing it because we were able to try this little experiment on a show that we were doing beforehand without having to risk not delivering on the show. And I still do this today. So I've done this kind of same model. When I have a bigger project coming, I check our slate of what projects we have, or I try and get another project that's close, and I say, okay, we're going to do this big way of doing something. Let's see if we can take a small version of this and inject it into this project and test it out and seeing what we're going to do. I mean, Pixar does very similar ideas they do a short film where they test out fluids or water simulation. And then with that one, they get all the kinks, and then they make a full feature film, right? And so it's the same kind of model. So I think it was called Experiment with an X, was one of those projects around that same time.
Amazing. One thing I wanted to ask, because that's not, you've mentioned these working on special effects. That's not what you were trained for, and that's not what you fell in love with.
No.
But, you know, it's a very important part of our experience. Yes. Now, it's almost impossible to have a movie without any kind of visual effects.
Right.
And it's not like it was 60 years ago when it meant making miniatures and playing around. I mean, some of these guys who made these things, I watched a lot of documentaries. It's beyond amazing. The guys from Mythbusters actually met each other by doing these things for Star Wars and stuff like that. And, you know, these things are amazing engineering, to be honest. Now it's easier. It's different. I wouldn't necessarily say it's easier, but it's completely different because it doesn't have to exist in physical world.
You don't have to be artisans or craftsmen to do it as much now.
You have to be an artist to be able to, you know, paint it properly. But, you know, it doesn't really, you can't really get a figure and put it on your, you know, desk. You usually get that after everything is done, but it's not something that was used as a prop.
I even think that it's the feature films and the budgets and the timing are mainly time prohibitive for doing anything like that, unless it's someone like Peter Jackson or even Guillermo del Toro who are a purist in it.
Wanted to ask, what was the most important or the most interesting or the craziest project you did
for visual effects?
Visual effects, yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. Let me see of the film. One of them was an Italian. I mean, the film is okay. The actual narrative. In fact, I knew going into the film that it was. I read the script and I was. It's a world building script, and I always read those because I've read a lot of different Asimov and even Tolkien and different. And so when I read the world building, I was like. I read it with a not a skepticism, but I say, how has this happened? Because if this exists in the world, our world has a practicality to it, right? If you invent something, this is why it's invented, and if it doesn't last, it's because it doesn't work within it. So when someone kind of whitewashes over that or just it's the future, it's like that's kind of a. So, anyways, there was some difficulty there in terms of the script, and so part of the pitch was that they're going to solve a lot of it through visual effects, which is a bad recipe, anyways. It's much of that spectacle thing we're talking about, but it was one of the projects on what we were doing, and
like in marketing when they give you something that's already done and say now make it viral.
Yeah.
That's not how it's done. So you make it viral.
It's like polishing a mushroom, let's say, because I'm sure I could say something. Exactly. You're working, but they greenlit the script and they were going to go ahead with it. So I was going to do the best job possible. So it has a lot of visual effects in this. It has, I think, maybe 700 different shots, which is, the volume was quite large in it, with full CG backgrounds, full dynamics. We had a whole city that crumbles. It became super ambitious. It was, wow, I remember this movie. We filmed but it was one of my first forays in being on many different film sets. So we did a portion in Toronto. So it was Danny Glover, full green screen environment. So, I mean, again, I wasn't Marvel. I wasn't working for, this is an ambitious program. Full green screen environments, so it's full environment recreation. So we filmed a few days in Toronto, then we filmed in Malta, and then we filmed in Rome. And the amount of world building and amount of visual effects within the film is daunting. There's some terrific visual effects in the film. There's some really good ones. I mean, with the full cities, there's a full destruction of a city. There's a whole opening sequence that is complete CG that takes place in what would be like old Templar knights. It's a tomb, and so we traverse this desert, and Alec Baldwin is also in this movie as well. Yeah, it's funny. So that was that film, Andron. It was the film. The film is, the story could be better. It's almost a derivative film of Maze Runner or Hunger Games, or I like to consider it more like Running Man, which was the Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah. I think it's Paul Verhoeven.
Yeah.
So it had that kind of feeling. The movie itself could be better, but the visual effects, there's a large chunk of them are stunning, and they weren't straightforward visual effects like green screen removal, or these were full CG environments, full CG vehicles. There's a character who has a full, he's a robot in it, but it's a fully mechanical head. And so I'm quite proud of the visual effects in the movie, especially because the team was not huge. It was a substantial team, but it wasn't huge. And we did it it was a tricky film to get everyone on board for what needs to be done in visual effects, because they were filming it like not low budget movie, but filming it like a smaller scale movie. Like run and gun or filming with like handheld camera work, right? Which is the exact opposite what you want in a CG film, right? You want to control every shot and how
and everything has to be perfect.
This was the exact opposite. So the budget of the film, meaning what we were able to achieve in visual effects, based on the way, you'll see a lot higher budgets, or you'll see a lot of higher budget films who are much more stringent about how they shoot. And this one was so ambitious in the shooting because they weren't anticipating doing the visual effects. I was on set and it took a lot of education saying, this is a really difficult way of doing things, guys. This is not, we got to do it this way. I was like, ugh. So I mitigated as many of the problems as I could at the time, but the amount of visual effects and what had to be done with them is very impressive. I'm really happy about the visual effects for that film. So that was one of them. And it lent me ability to move on to other projects and do quite well.
Somehow in the industry, I think one important factor is how good the film is.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, I'm pretty sure that, people who are in the industry can dissect and say, okay, the story is maybe not that cool, but what these guys did is amazing. Let's call these guys. So it's usually something that, if you put in your portfolio, maybe, you can always say, please don't watch the movie, but here is the show reel from the movie. Yeah. Just take a look at that.
So our VFX show reel was wonderful, but the movie, but again, though, it's so much better if the film is really good, right? Because then it gets its own accolades. So that was one of them. Yeah, that was a good one. That for visual effects. I did one called Black Butterfly, which was a good film, better film. The ending needed a bit of work, but it was Antonio Banderas and Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. And in that film, remember I was discussing how I take one idea and then expand upon it? In that film, we had to film in location, so on soundstage, but the outside needed to be on location. And there were some sophisticated camera moves in it. So we built remember what you were describing, that kind of glass, but we built a 3-dimensional multiplaning environment. And this was in the days when camera projection wasn't so popular. So I went on set to where we were filming and I took so many different photos and we were able to stitch them together, build a really simple geometry, really simple shapes, and project the photos. So we didn't have to worry about lighting or anything because it was baked into the photos themselves. And then if that wasn't hard enough, it was another handheld camera move. So it was a lot of work that way. But you only saw it through windows and sometimes with the doors. So it wasn't the full set. It was just enough that we could tell if we were doing it right. And I knew that the next film we would be working on, it's about a bank robbery. The next film or the second film, I already gotten the script for it. And it's a bank robbery that they have to recreate 1970s Orange County, California. And we weren't going to film there. We're going to film in Atlanta. So we would have to do it in a full 360 blue screen. So we would have to do the same thing only on a much larger scale. So we said, okay, let's do it. Because you can do what we were doing basically by doing something like a backdrop where you just project it. But I said, let's be a little ambitious in this and build it in 3 dimensions, right? Like, so that we can figure out how to make this work. And then once we go into this next film, we just scale up this procedure and we already have our legwork done on it. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is kind of, I don't know if it's my talent, but I'm able to see a problem ahead of time or a challenge ahead of time and anticipate how to solve smaller versions of it, like the node base of it. And then by the time we get to the problem, it's manageable. It's not like you're putting out so many fires, but we have a tactic or a plan or a way about doing it that's going to work that can scale out.
Yeah, basically, you take the impossible and you make it possible. Not easy, but possible.
Yeah, I love the way you said it. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, so after finishing up with the studio you were partner with, you were partner in, how did things unfold?
So I have a good friend, his name is Bobby Chu. He has, he's the founder and creator of Imaginism Studio, which is his own studio. He's a wonderful concept artist, painter. He did a bunch of the characters from Alice in Wonderland, some Men in Black. Bobby and I were classmates, and we actually worked a lot within school. He's a good friend. And he called me up and he said, he also did Lightbox Expo. Do you know what that is? Yeah, he's a founder of that as well. He called me up and he says, hey, how's it going? And I said, it's going well. I was a little bit sad. I was depressed a little bit. I was down. And he says, listen, Paul Lessane, he's a painter. He worked on Lord of the Rings. He was also a traditional matte painter who used to paint on glass for movies. And Paul Lessane, I'm a big fan of Paul Lessane. He says, I'm doing a conference, like I'm doing one of these things, and Paul Lessane is one of the speakers. Why don't you come by? You can watch his seminar, and then we're having a drink and meet afterwards with all the artists, and you can meet him as well. And I said, well, I don't know, I'm not feeling down for it. And he goes, and I go, you know what? I'm kind of broke too. I can't afford your conferences, right? I was being cheeky. He says, no, come for free. You're my guest, right? And I said, and I was like, you know what? Why not? So I went there. I met Paul. He's a wonderful guy. I saw his seminar. It's interesting. I went to the drink and meet, and I met them. And it was kind of late, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to leave. As I'm leaving, my good friend, also another alumni from my school, about a year ahead, his name's Matt. Matt's blocking the door, and he's turned away, and I say, excuse me. He turns around, he goes, holy cow. He goes, it's you, Peter. Well, I say, hey, Matt, how's it going? He goes, he goes, are you still working with, I go, no, I'm not doing that anymore. And he says, oh, amazing. He goes, I'm working with these Italians, this new studio. He goes, you're Italian? I said, yeah, I have dual citizenship. And he goes, I'm working with these Italians, and I'm looking for people to work with on an animated project I'm coming. I says, okay, great. And I said, but I just want to tell you, I don't want to be in charge of anything. I just want to be like a production artist. I just want to be I just want to be an artist. I don't want to be. He goes, yeah, of course. He goes, no, of course not. He goes, whatever you want. He goes, it's I'm working on this animated film. Do you want to come on and work on it? He goes, he knew we were friends, and he knew that I hold myself to a high standard of the work that I do. And he hadn't built his team yet. And so I said, sure. And he goes, by the way, did you ever do any VFX? I said, yeah, I've done VFX. And he goes, oh, have you ever been on set? I go, yeah, I've been on set, but I only want to be a production artist. I don't want to do that kind of stuff.
Yes, of course.
And so he says, I'm going to introduce you to Ferdinando, who was the COO at the time, right? And so Ferdinando calls me and he says, Matt, I'm not going to do the accent. He goes, Matt tells me that you're in this field, et cetera. I go, yeah. And he says, so you're going to work on this animated film with us. I go, if you like my work, sure, I'm open to working on it. And he says, so have you ever worked on a VFX before? I said, yeah, I've worked on VFX before. And he goes, and have you been on set before? Have you done this kind of stuff? I said, yes, but that's not what I want to do. I just want to work. And he says, yeah, no problem. He goes, but you've built the studio, or I said, yes. And I said, okay. He says, okay, we'll come in next week and on Monday and we can talk. This was like a Wednesday. And so I hung up, and then maybe he looked me up, maybe he looked at me, and he calls me back. He goes, can you come in tomorrow? And I said, I don't have anything prepared yet. He goes, no, just come in tomorrow. I want to talk. said, okay, I can come in tomorrow. So I made my way down. He had a nice office in what's Yorkville, which is a really posh area of Toronto. And I go upstairs, and he has the poster of the animated film they're going to start. And like a magic trick, he takes the one poster, and then he slides it away and puts another poster in front of me. He says, okay, there's this animated film, but before we start that, we have this we have this live action movie that we need to do the VFX on. I said, okay. And I said, he says, I don't have anyone, and I saw that you've worked on it before. I said, okay. And so he says, do you think you can help out? And I said, okay, how many artists do you have? He says, well, with you, we have one, right? I said, oh my God. And I said, how big is your facility? Like how big is your studio? He says, we're going to build you the best studio. I said, okay. And how many shots are there? He goes, it's about 300 shots. I said, that's a lot. I go, how long do you have? And he says, if we have about a month and a half. And I said, wow, this is a monumentous task, by the way, without a studio and no animation team. And frankly, someone who doesn't want to be doing this as well, right? So I was sitting there, I said, and I wanted to work on this animated film. And I was saying, okay, I have an idea. It's like, I'll do this. I'll do the VFX list. So I'll do the bid, which is what it is. It's an a la carte menu of the VFX that are done for I've done a few of them before, and I've done many after since, but it takes the different shots of the film that need VFX, and you basically indicate what needs to be done in visual effects, what departments, like what you need from production, and then how much it's going to cost per shot. Roughly, yeah, a ballpark. Sometimes you do it right from the script, which is mold ballpark. Sometimes you do it after film is shot, and then you have an idea of what it's going to do. It's usually about a week and a half to do something like that. And so I went home, and I was like, okay, I'll do a great job for them. I did it about 3 days. So really, really well done. And I knew he didn't have anybody, and I wasn't going to jump into it. And I basically wrote all the positions you would need to do each shot. So if I saw the shot, I said, you need a match mover, you need a roto artist, you need a 2D compositor, and then you need someone to do color correct, right? I didn't break down each budget, but then how much it would cost, roughly. And so I came back and I presented to him. I said, here's a VFX list. Consider this as a goodwill gesture. Once I jump on the 2D animated film, you can take this, and you know what the budget of the film is. And Andrea, my boss, Andrea Iervolino, who I'll get to in a second, was also there. And he had looked at it, and my numbers had lined up with a lot of the other studios that they had shopped. And when I mean studios, they went to all the big production houses and had figured out how much it's going to cost. And my numbers lined up. And so it looked like I was downplaying exactly my expertise, right? Like it's like how they had spent money getting these other VFX lists, and I come in and mine lined up. And he goes, okay, you're the VFX supervisor. I go, no. I'm the artist who's working on the film. And he goes, no, you're the guy. I said, I'm not the guy. You got the wrong guy, right? And he goes, no, you're the guy, right? So I said, I'll do this. I said, I'll take this and I'll call some of the people that I've worked with, other VFX supervisors within the field, within the industry, especially in Canada. There's quite a few of them. And I'll find you someone to jump in on this. Tell me what the budget is for the position, and I'll work with it. So they told me. And I'd spent a few days, and I'd called up other VFX supervisors or VFX leads or people that I thought were good positions. And I told them how big, same questions. How big is the studio? How many people is there? How many shots? When is it due, right? And so I said, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, it's impossible. And so the other one, it's impossible, Peter. It can't be done. Are you kidding me? This is impossible. And I was looking at it, I go, it's not impossible, right?
It's just insane.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's improbable. It's difficult. It's hard to sell, but it's not impossible. So I was looking, I was like, because I knew my numbers. I'd worked it out. I said, okay, if you do this. And so it kind of irked me, right? I said, okay, if everyone thinks it's impossible, then the only option is that it'll fail anyways, right? And so they can't do it, right? It's impossible. But if it's not, then it'll be a monumentous task, right? So what I did is I said, okay, I came back to him and said, okay, look, I'll help you do this, because the timeline lined up that it would be done by the time that the animated movie started. So I said, okay, I'll do this for you. And, but after this film is done, you'll need to find someone who's better to to do this, right? I'll do this position until you find someone better, until I die, right? I didn't say the die part. And so they said, yeah, of course, right? And so that's what I did. I took it on. And the tricky part was I had a non-compete with the previous studio I was working for, and I was working with, and it was for 10 years I've been working with them. It's a long non-compete, meaning that it's a long time that I built relationships. Luckily, one of the senior VFX artists who I was working with applied to this position without me asking him anything. So he saw the ad that they put out in the market, and he had applied to it, and I saw his name as one of the people coming in. I was like, this is terrific, because I don't breach my non-compete, and I have a strong second support. And there were 2 or 3 others. And so I built a team. It was about 15 artists, I think. And we delivered. So I built the studio, we delivered, and we took on another 25 shots. So we did something like 402 shots in the timeline that was necessary. So I'm the VFX supervisor for the studio, building a team back into the position that I thought I wasn't going to sign up for. But I was liking what I was doing. It was super challenging. It was super different. And they had given me complete trust in doing it because they had no other hope, right? It was impossible. And so that film, then there was the next film after that, and next film after that, and next film after that. And I found myself that I was building large or semi-large teams and in charge of quite a few people, which I thought that I wouldn't be. But I mean, it wasn't the path I chose, but probably the one that I needed. Yeah.
Okay. And how did you end up working in Serbia?
So I was doing that. Matt, remember the guy I spoke to? He was developing a animated film that Andrea wanted to do as a full feature film, animated film, 3D. Big budget or big film, and he wanted to work with the people in the studio. And so Matt had a project at the time. He was in animation just as me, and him and my office were basically across from each other. And he was working on the beginning of what was called Arctic Dogs or Arctic Justice. It was Arctic Justice Thunder Squad at the time, and it was good. It was really good. And he was working on it. And I had quite a few films that I was still working on in VFX. So I couldn't jump on this animated film, which is really what I wanted to do anyways. And so he was working on it. I was just sort of looking over the fence, and I had worked in a little portions of it in look dev, and I worked in the story department really early on as well. There's a few jokes that stayed within the film eventually. And so the film was made in our studio, and it's a terrific film. It's Jeremy Renner, Omar Sy, John Cleese as the villain, Heidi Klum, James Franco, Alec Baldwin. So there's, I think, 3 Academy Award winners within the film. And it opened up to 3,400 theaters theatrically. And then it was number 3 on Netflix when it came out. And Andrea realized from that film, he had the IP. That's a really important part, because now you can start, not all service work, you can start creating your own sort of licensing. And so Arctic Dogs had this IP, and Andrea and Monica understood the market of short content. What he found was at the time is that people were saying that they didn't have the time or inclination to watch long things, long movies, long films, etc. That most people were consuming media via social media. So Instagram stories or that kind of stuff. The paradox or the irony even is that most people say they didn't have enough time to watch it. So they would watch these 1 minute or 30-second reels, but they would spend 3 hours watching this stuff. So he knew that if we reduce our show or make a short content with smaller bites, people would actually consume more of it than they would if it was a long or traditional 22-minute episode, right? At least that's where the market.
Basically the same thing they did to, support the Despicable Me and Minions. And what they did was create short sketches, shorts, just to, introduce the characters and everything.
It was brilliant.
It was ridiculously popular. And of course, if these are so cute, if these are so interesting, if they like bananas so much, then I'm going to go and watch the full movie.
Absolutely. And you have a penetration into a market that exactly what you're saying. They don't have, I don't know about the attention span, but they're more inclined to just watch these kind of shorts or stories and such. And so we built this kind of model. And at the time, the Canadian studio, we weren't working on any of, I had a couple of the films, but it was, I had this interesting model where I didn't need, I could do it with a remote studio. So some of the people I had worked with, they had branched off and formed micro or boutique studios, and we didn't have to carry the overhead of the artists, etc. And the feature film had shrunk down, and Andrea wanted to move all his operations to Italy. So none of the Canadians that were working there, I don't know if they didn't qualify, but they kind of, the studio kind of dissolved a little bit, right? I had my CG part of it. There was a few of us. There was about 10 that still remained. But most of them were either remote workers or freelancers that I was able to galvanize to work on the films that I was working. And then the animation was all being done, or will be done, especially the pre-production, overseas in Rome. And so he kept me on for all the aforementioned reasons. And I was also familiar with, I was the only one left of the legacy of the previous studio. And so I knew where everything was, and I knew where, I knew the property. And so what happened is I went to Rome and I started working with a studio that we helped build there to now start creating the series work based on the Arctic Justice IP. So I became the showrunner. I was the creator and the showrunner and the creative producer for Arctic Friends. And then we had started working with, Johnny Depp was involved on one of our feature films. And he wanted to get back into animation, but didn't want to work with Disney. And I don't know if people know, but it was a very interesting time in his life, right?
Yes.
And Andrea told him, he said, no, we have an animation studio and we want to make Johnny Depp as a cartoon character. And he loved it. And so we created Johnny Puff. This was the first.
He basically is a cartoon character.
But that's the thing. He is the personification because he's so bohemian. He's so, I mean,
unreal.
Yeah, but in the most fantastic way. I was thinking about it the other day and I was like, who is a bigger movie star than Johnny Depp? And I can't think of one for this reason, because Johnny Depp has the appeal for children. He's Jack Sparrow, etc. But he's also been in television, 21 Jump Street, and he's been in horror movies. But he's got such a plethora of work that I was trying really hard. I can't think of a bigger worldwide actor than him. Like, people will argue maybe George Clooney or Brad Pitt or something like that.
Or Jack Nicholson. But Jack Nicholson is always Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, and what animation, like if you ask a kid about Jack Nicholson, they might know who he is. But if you ask them who Jack Sparrow is, they'll know who he is as a character, right? And so anyways, he wanted to get into animation, and we had built the character, and I was involved on it. And so I met with Johnny and his team. And by the way, the character doesn't speak. He's a Gramelot, right? And Johnny loved this idea. He's like, so we had talked about what are the words? Like, what's the vocabulary? And how does this vocabulary work? And is this because one of the things is, you don't have to be Tolkien-esque. You don't have to create Elvish or Dwarvish, right? Because that's not what the Puffins do. And what you need to create is these small words or small vocabulary that imply things, but aren't really necessarily saying it. And
Baby talk.
Yeah, and he loved it. He says, okay, you need something to describe urgency. You need something, almost even like, it's a bad example. If you have a dog, right? A dog has like bark, but it has a bark for wanting to go outside. So it's like, oh, and it has another bark for someone at the door. And has another dog is like, like, hey, are you going to feed me? Oh. Right. And it's all inflection, right? So it's only using one word, right? And so, but with Johnny's character, we developed a little bit further because he's a bit of a wanderer. And I'm getting to the Serbia part in a second. So he's a bit of a wanderer. And so we developed this thing and we made Puffins. And I was the showrunner for that. So I created the showrunner for it alongside, Andrea helped create the show as well in a kind of macro way. And Giuseppe Squillaci, he co-created, he co-showrunned it with me later on in the episode once I come to Serbia, which I'll get to. So Andrea Jervolino we had worked with Milos Bikovic, who's quite a big celebrity here as well, on a film called Beyond the Edge, starring him and Antonio Banderas. And Andrea came here in March or February of 2020 for a movie premiere.
Fun times.
super fun time. And right at that time is when the lockdown, he couldn't go anywhere, right? So Andrea, I haven't seen him stay anywhere for longer than maybe 6 days. And he was stuck here for 4 months, right? And we were always thinking about expanding the European studio in Rome into a different territory. We just weren't sure where it was. And he called me up and he says, I need you to come to Serbia. I'm like, where? Serbia. I said, okay. And he goes, I go, but it's COVID. He goes, not here. Not here. The Serbians are not recognizing COVID, right? He goes, everything's the same way, right? I said, okay, fantastic. And he called me up. He goes, we're opening up a studio in Belgrade. And I said, okay. I said, I wasn't sure how to read it because he always calls me with these fantastic ideas, right? I think I told you about the Ferrari or Lamborghini story. And so I said, okay, why don't you call me tomorrow with some of the details? Actually, he says, I'm going to call you tomorrow with some of the people here on the ground who we'll be working with. In this case, it was ADS, Archangel Digital Studios, which is Milos Biković's company alongside Tatiana, and Bojan. Great people. And he called me the next day and he says, okay, so we're opening up the studio in Belgrade and Novi Sad. I said, whoa, hold on. He goes, is that the same place? He goes, no, we're opening up 2 studios. I said, we're opening up 2 studios. And he says, yes. And he connected me with Mileta and Pedja, who have they had their own studio in Novi Sad, and they were also professors at the academy there. So I was on this very large Zoom or Skype or whatever call with a bunch of people who are asking me how we're going to make this studio, right? Because I'm the guy, right? And so I came to Serbia. And we started from the ground up, from scratch. We basically put an open call, which I think Milos and Andrea did socially, like on social media. And we started to build the studio with Puffins Impossible, which is the new animated action-adventure version of Puffins, which is... I love it in so many different ways because Puffins is terrific. I like it. But it had to conform to certain things, right? Puffins are the little, if I haven't explained it, there's a character within the film that's like our own minions, but essentially it's a puffin, if for those who don't know, it's almost like a penguin and a parrot had a love child.
It's called like Arctic parrot, basically. That's the...
Yeah, it's an Arctic parrot. And they're adorable and they're cute.
Yes.
And
in real life and in cartoon.
They're stunning. And I mean, the aftermarket value of them is incredible. And so Puffins was great. And Puffins Impossible was kind of like the action-adventure superhero version of it. And a lot of the stuff... because it was done in Serbia and working with the team here, was able to be almost blue sky, almost no ceiling, right? Because Andrea came here and he's like, okay, we're going to do it. And then he said, so he's like, when they were walking in Skadarlia or something, and he goes, I think I'm going to buy a flat here. Maybe I'm going to buy land or something, right? And then the border opened up or whatever, and he's like, I'll be back, and then left, and then I was here. And so there wasn't anyone to say what not to do. And so I said, okay, if we're going to do this, let's do it the best way we can. The studio itself that we built is amazing. We right down from the small details to the desks, we built custom desks with some of the great artisans here. Specifically for animation, all the artwork, all the decoration, it's all holistically done for the studio to be the best working environment. And the actual show Puffins Impossible alongside ADS and the team working, almost like a love letter to my childhood stuff that I used to love. Like each character is based on something that I used to grow up with in animation. Even the starting has kind of like that A-Team. I don't know if you remember the A-Team, but it has this kind of feeling to it because no one said we couldn't do it. There wasn't this committee like Homer Simpson's car designing what it is. It could be super pure. And so I ended up in Serbia and we built the studio and we did 54 episodes of Puffins Impossible. It went to Apple TV, Amazon Prime, Google Play, Sky TV, Chili TV. It's going to be on Spanish TV. I guess I'm announcing it now. And we have a couple of other places it's going to go to broadcast. I just came back from MIPCOM. Well, actually, I came back from somewhere else, but I went to MIPCOM not too long ago. And people who had never heard of this saw it and says, wow, this production level is super high. where are you doing it? Serbia? Serbia's got an animation scene? I go, yeah. And it's got a kick-ass animation scene. And it's only been happening in these last 2.5 years. And people were astonished on the amount of work, the quality of work, and the level of awesomeness that's created within this 54 episodes in a very, very short amount of time, especially within Europe, which has this kind of idea of inertia, right? Like, why do it today when we can do it tomorrow? And the great things about Serbs is that it says, why do it tomorrow when we can do it today? Which was amazing. So that's how I ended up in Serbia and still here.
Well, basically, what you have been doing is, filling out childhood dreams for basically most of the people working there. We all wanted to do something like that, but we never had the opportunity.
Right.
Now I'm too old. I don't want to do it anymore. It's too stressful.
Right.
But if I was in my early 20s and I wanted to make a leap of faith in some field when it comes to my career, well, that would make perfect sense because it will be fun.
Yes.
And in the end, it can be amazing. Whether it will be amazing, it's never sure. You have to wait and figure it out.
Right.
But it has a potential to be amazing, which is something that's quite rare right now. Especially, working in a fairly small team on a project like this is different than working as one little gear in a huge system.
Right.
Working on an amazing, fully featured movie or a big AAA game or something like that, and someone plays and you say, you see that mug I did there. No one cares about that. But
I get
here
it.
you can influence a lot of different
Very much
things.
so. We have the writing team is it's all done domestically, especially for the pre-production. So all the writers, directors, story artists, the asset development team, amongst a whole bunch of other positions. So what I love about this series, I love all of them, but specifically what's close to my heart is that the writing and the story is very domestic, meaning that I'm overseeing it as showrunner, but I don't want to cannibalize or tell the joke the way I would tell the joke. So what's really interesting and really fun and really exciting about this show is that the scripts and the stories are very much spiced or peppered with a Serbian sensibility to it, right? So when you see it, it's just like, that's funny. I mean, that's really good. That's great. And I trust in the team that they're going to do their best work, but it doesn't have to be my voice. It's a team Skirat. It's a choir. And I think where a lot of other companies have come, larger companies within Serbia have come and pushed Serbians to the back of house. So it's like there's a big front of house that has all the names, those, whatever it is, the American names or whatever names it is. One of the agenda here was to push those itches, whatever that last name, to the front, because this is theirs. This is part of Serbia. And I think it creates an ownership within the artistic integrity of the project that you're doing. It says, I have to make this look good because that's my family name on there as well.
I do truly believe that, coming here was a big deal for our scene because we had people working in this field, but we never had, at least past 20 years since everything has been digital, we never had studios that did something like this. We had individuals working on special effects and smaller teams, a couple of people who worked on a couple of interesting things. We had some local, let's say, interesting projects, but nothing at this level, at this scale. We also have serious gaming industry, but it's not comparable to this. This is introducing something completely new to a market that's been hungry for working on projects like this. We have a pretty long history when it comes to classic animation. We have done amazing things in the past. It's just that it's one of these things that's hard work, somewhat expensive, and is usually considered nice to have and not something that you would focus on.
Right.
With this opportunity, I think everyone who had their childhood dream working on something like this has an opportunity, has a place where they can figure out if that's something that they really want to do or not, or maybe it's just a childhood dream and it should stay like this. So Peter, thank you so much for sharing your story, your wonderful story and your crazy life.
Yeah. It's only continuing.
Yeah. Crazy people make big differences. Crazy people change the world.
Hvala lepo.
Thank you all for listening to this. A mogu i da se prebacim na srpski. Hvala vam što ste slušali. Kao i do sad, sve komentare ostavite na za to predviđenim mestima na YouTube-u. Hvala vam na pažnji. To bi bilo to. Mi se vidimo ponovo sledeće nedelje.